Hello everybody and welcome to the second screencast for GCSE English. This is approaching paper 1 still, but this time we're going to be looking at questions 3 and 4, the questions which are worth the most marks on this paper. So let's start with a reminder about timings, which we talked about in the first screencast. So a reminder that you're going to allow yourself time to actually read the extract, 10 minutes, and then 2 minutes for every mark. So for example, if a question is worth 6 marks, you're going to be spending 12 minutes on it. And then another reminder about the strategy that we talked about. And this is the idea that we read the questions before we actually read the extract. And what we know about the questions is that questions 1 and 2 will be very short answer questions, and that question 3 is a longer answer where you'll be writing about language and structure, and that question 4 will ask you to evaluate how effectively the writer has presented something, and this one is worth 15 marks. We also know that for questions 1 to 3 you will be given specific lines to focus on for your answers. So a reminder that in this screencast we're focusing on questions 3 and 4. So, question 3, this is the paper that we looked at in the previous screencast, and these are the annotations made previously too. The question asks us, within lines 14 to 25, how does the writer use language and structure to show the narrator's feelings about Bertha? So it's worth 6 marks, we're going to spend 12 minutes on it. So we can see the mark scheme here. We're aiming for levels 2 and 3 for this question, but note the possible trap that you could fall into. You need to write about both language and structure to get more than 2 marks. So for this reason, I suggest aiming for 2 paragraphs in total for question 3. 1 paragraph on how language is used, so that's a P paragraph, and 1 P paragraph on how structure is used. Now if you have any extra time left out of the 12 minutes, then add a 3rd paragraph. But make sure please that you are focusing on language and structure before you add any extras on at all. So let's remind ourselves what sort of points count for language and what points count for structure. And you might want to press pause now to give yourself a chance to read this. So let's return to the question 3 for this paper. And remember that if you have bracketed off the line numbers at the start of the exam, you can see clearly now which part of the extract to focus on, which is this part here. So let's start to think of some possible points we could make about how language and structure are used to show the narrator's feelings about Bertha. First up, here's a point about language, and it's about word choice. More specifically, the use of adjectives to describe Bertha in this extract. So you can see I've highlighted them here: false, false again, cruel, worthless, detested. And that those adjectives give us a very powerful sense of how the narrator feels about Bertha. He appears to hate her, yet at the same time we also know that that hatred probably comes from the fact that she is rejecting his love for her and perhaps has chosen somebody else in his place. Another language point here, this one's about the use of metaphor, when the narrator tells us he has serpents and adders in his heart. Now this is a really effective way of conveying the hatred inside him as something that is wriggling and poisonous. And you might also want to add the point that the serpent is seen by some readers as a Christian symbol, with its associations with Satan, the devil. Now, next point is a point on structure. So you'll have noticed when you read this first time through that so many of these sentences are exclamatives. They end in an exclamation mark. There are 5 used in total in this particular paragraph. Now these exclamatives and the use of the exclamation marks help us to convey the passion that the narrator is feeling about Bertha, as well as a sense of drama for the reader. And the final point is also on structure and is about the use of dashes, which you can see I've highlighted in pink. These break up the sentences and create a breathless, out-of-control feeling. Or as I said up here, it creates the sense that his anger can't be contained or structured. So as you can see here, I've found 4 points, but your target is to write about 2, one on language and one on structure. So let's look at what these paragraphs might look like. So your paragraph on language might look something like this. And you can see here that I've colour-coded the different parts of the P. And you might want to press pause now to give yourself a chance to read this. So this is a point on language. And it's the point about the use of metaphor with the serpents and adders were in my heart quote. And now for a paragraph on structure. Again, you might want to pause this now. And here's the mark scheme for this question, and you can see that there's a huge range of points you could include for this, but they by no means would expect you to cover all of these or even most of these. Remember, our target is to come up with one developed paragraph for language and one developed paragraph for structure. If you have any time left over, then by all means add an extra paragraph writing about something which interests you. But please make sure that you are covering language and structure before you do that. Now, if you wanted to, you could press pause for the screencast now, choose one of the other points on language that I haven't developed into a paragraph, and have a go at doing that yourself, turning one of those other points, either about the use of adjectives or the use of exclamation marks, and develop it into a proper P paragraph, just to practice. So now let's turn to question 4. So question 4 you get to spend 30 minutes on. And I would suggest that we aim for 4 or 5 fully developed P paragraphs for this question. And I think because you have half an hour, you certainly have time to spend a few minutes planning the key points that you might include in your answer. Here's the mark scheme. We're aiming for the top of level 3 upwards in order to get our grades 4 and 5. And there's one thing about question 4, you will always be asked to evaluate how successfully this is achieved. And there are some example phrases here in green that you can use for this. And if we're smart, we will use evaluative language in our topic sentences so that each P paragraph includes words like effective or successfully, so that the whole paragraph is shaped around the fact that you are evaluating how well the writer is doing. So let's look at some possible points that you could use as topic sentences to start off the paragraphs. I'll give you a bit of time to read that, but you'll see that I've put the evaluative language in red. One good way, another effective technique, the writer successfully, is shown really effectively through the narrator. And if you remember to include this evaluative language in your topic sentence, the sentence that starts off the paragraph, then you know that you've covered those bases and you don't need to worry too much about it. You might want to press pause if you want to read these in more detail. So I've taken one of these points, the second one, and I've turned it into a P paragraph. You might want to press now to read this. You can see I've colour-coded it again. So if you have a copy of this exam paper and the extract, you might want to have a go at choosing one of the other points that remain and adding the evidence and the analysis for them to turn them into properly developed paragraphs. You're of course going to need some pen and paper if you're going to do that. And if that is what you've done, then spend a minute or two reflecting on your own paragraph and perhaps sectioning off the different parts of it for point, evidence and analysis. And if you think you can do better, try again. This is something we get better at with practice. So the more we practice, the better we will do. So some final reminders. Okay, these are reminders about timings and a reminder that you must comment on both language and structure for question 3 and that you must use some evaluative language for question 4. Okay, so good luck with the first part of paper 1. The remaining screencast is going to be focusing on how to approach section B, which is the written task.